The key slid into the lock, but it would not turn. I tried again, harder this time, while my suitcase stood behind me on the porch. Through the window, I saw strangers tearing apart my living room, and my daughter-in-law wearing my gardening gloves, as if she already owned the place. Then my son Michael opened the door but refused to let me inside. "You can't live here anymore, Mom," he said. "I changed the locks while you were away. The house is being sold." Behind him, my belongings were packed into cardboard boxes. Michael thought he had taken everything from me, but he had forgotten one important detail. The house might have new locks, but the 14 acres beneath it still belonged to me. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me honestly, what would you do if your own child locked you out of your home? Please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I would also love to know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Standing in my own driveway, locked out of the home where I had spent more than 40 years, I felt as though the world had tilted beneath my feet. Only 3 weeks earlier, I had hugged my younger sister Carol goodbye at the airport in Portland, Maine. It had been the first real vacation either of us had taken together since my husband William passed away 3 years before. Carol had insisted that I needed fresh air, lobster rolls by the harbor, and long walks along the rocky coastline, instead of spending every day tending my garden and pretending grief had become easier. For the first time in years, I had laughed without forcing it. I had collected little gifts for everyone before flying home. Emily loved blueberry candy, so I bought 2 bags. Michael had always enjoyed handmade maple syrup, so I packed a bottle carefully inside my suitcase. Even Amanda received a beautiful hand-painted kitchen towel, decorated with lighthouses. I had spent almost an hour choosing it because I wanted her to know I appreciated everything she did for the family. How foolish that seemed now. My suitcase still sat beside the porch steps while Michael stood between me and my own front door. "You should have called before coming back," he said. I stared at him, convinced I had misunderstood. "What? We weren't ready." I looked past his shoulder. My living room looked nothing like the one I had left. The floral curtains my mother had sewn decades ago were gone. The rocking chair where William used to drink his morning coffee had disappeared. Plastic sheets covered the hardwood floors. 2 contractors carried pieces of drywall through the hallway as if they belonged there. Then Amanda appeared from the kitchen. She wasn't surprised to see me. She smiled politely, almost professionally, wiping her hands on the gardening gloves I had received from William on our 25th anniversary. Those gloves had been hanging inside my mudroom when I left. "Jennifer," she said sweetly, "you're home earlier than we expected." Earlier, I had returned exactly on the date Michael knew about months in advance. "What is happening?" I asked. Amanda exchanged a glance with Michael before answering. "We've started renovating." "Renovating what?" "The house. My house." Michael sighed dramatically. "Mom, this isn't easy." "No," I replied quietly. "It certainly isn't." He folded his arms. "You've been living alone for too long." "I've managed just fine." "You're almost 70. So, the property is too much for you." I looked beyond him again. Near the fireplace stood 6 cardboard boxes. Each one had black marker writing across the side. Kitchen, books, clothes. I recognized my handwriting on one of them. Someone had simply written over it. My stomach tightened. "You packed my things," Amanda answered before Michael could. "We organized everything for you. Without asking me, we thought it would be less stressful." Less stressful. I almost laughed. Instead, I noticed something sitting near the front gate. A large white sign. For sale. I couldn't breathe. "Michael." He didn't look away. "We've already spoken with the developer." I felt every heartbeat echo inside my ears. "You listed my property." "We're doing what's best." For who? He hesitated. For the family. I slowly climbed one step onto the porch. Michael immediately blocked my path. You can't come inside. I live here. Not anymore. The words landed harder than any slap. Not anymore. I looked directly into my son's eyes. The same blue eyes William had. The same little scar above his eyebrow from falling off his bicycle when he was 9 years old. I remembered carrying him into the emergency room, terrified, because blood covered half his face. I remembered working overtime to pay for his first pickup truck. I remembered sitting through every baseball game, every school concert, every disappointment. Now, he couldn't even let me step into my own hallway. Who gave you permission to change my locks? I asked. I had to. No, Michael. I did. Why? The house isn't safe. It was perfectly safe 3 weeks ago. It needs major repairs. So you call me. You never answer your phone when you're traveling. My phone worked perfectly. Amanda stepped closer. We discussed this for months. No, I said firmly. You discussed it. No one discussed it with me. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. You don't understand. Then explain. He took a deep breath. I have power of attorney. I stared at him. What? You signed it before you left. I signed a limited authorization. It gives me authority. It gives you authority to pay my property taxes while I was away. It covers more than that. No. His expression hardened. You signed every page. I signed exactly what Robert prepared. Amanda crossed her arms. Jennifer, maybe you don't remember everything. The sentence was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it even crueler. I understood exactly what she was implying. That I was old, forgetful, confused, the kind of woman whose memories couldn't be trusted. I looked directly at her. I remember perfectly. She smiled again. I'm only saying traveling can be exhausting. Michael nodded. Mom, we're trying to help. You changed the locks. You shouldn't be living alone. You packed my belongings. You need somewhere easier. Then Michael reached into his jacket pocket. He handed me a glossy brochure. Sunny Meadows Senior Living Community. I found a beautiful apartment. I looked at the smiling elderly couple on the cover. We already paid the deposit. My fingers trembled. You already… What? We wanted everything ready, as though my life had been scheduled without me, as though I had become another project to manage. I slowly closed the brochure. Where's Emily? Michael hesitated. At a friend's house. Does she know what you've done? She knows we're helping you. Something in his voice told me that wasn't entirely true. Emily always called me when I returned from a trip. Always. This time, my phone had remained silent. I glanced toward the barn. Its large doors stood open. Inside were more cardboard boxes. One had split open. I recognized the blue china set my mother had received as a wedding gift. Plates lay wrapped in newspaper instead of proper packing paper. One corner of a serving bowl had already chipped. My chest tightened. Those dishes weren't expensive. They were irreplaceable. So that's it? I asked quietly. You come home, and your own family decides your life for you. Michael looked uncomfortable. Amanda answered instead. We're protecting you. No. I shook my head slowly. You're replacing me. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The contractors continued working behind them. Hammers echoed through the house William and I had built together. Finally, I said, I need my medication. Michael stepped aside just enough. You can get a few personal things. I walked inside. Every room felt unfamiliar. Cabinets stood open. Pictures had been removed from the walls. Dust floated through the sunlight. It no longer felt like home. I went upstairs. I packed my medication, a warm coat, my Bible, and the framed photograph of William that had always rested beside my bed. When I picked it up, I whispered, "I hope you're seeing this." As I walked back downstairs, I caught one last glimpse of the family room. The place where birthdays had been celebrated, Christmas mornings shared, grandchildren chased across the hardwood floor. Now strangers measured walls while my own son watched without shame. Outside, Susan Parker's car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, saw my face, and immediately understood something was terribly wrong. Without asking questions, she walked over, picked up one of my suitcases, and placed it in her trunk. I looked back at my home one final time. Michael never offered me a key. He never apologized. He simply closed the front door. The sound of the new lock clicking into place echoed across the quiet afternoon. As Susan drove away, I kept staring through the rear window until the farmhouse disappeared behind the trees. Only then did I quietly repeat one sentence to myself. They may have changed the locks, but they forgot to ask who still owned the land. Susan didn't say a word during the first 10 minutes of the drive. She had known me for nearly 40 years, first as a co-worker at the Buncombe County Register of Deeds office, and later as my closest friend. She understood that silence was sometimes kinder than sympathy. When we finally stopped at a red light, she reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. "I'm taking you home with me," she said. "I don't want to be a burden." "You've never been one." I looked out the passenger window. "I keep wondering if I dreamed it." "You didn't." "I keep expecting to wake up and find William sitting on the porch drinking coffee." Susan smiled sad. "He'd have something to say about all this." "Probably. He'd probably scare Michael half to death." Despite everything, I managed the smallest laugh. William had never been a loud man. He didn't need to be. One disappointed look from him was enough to make anyone reconsider a foolish decision. By the time we reached Susan's house, my body felt exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound of the new lock clicking shut. It wasn't just a door. It felt like my own son had locked me out of our entire family history. The next morning, Susan set a mug of coffee beside me at her kitchen table. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I honestly don't know." "Yes, you do." I looked up. "You spent 32 years reviewing deeds, easements, property transfers, probate records, and power of attorney documents." "That was a long time ago. It doesn't matter. I've been retired for 6 years. You still know how to spot a bad document." I stared into my coffee. She was right. For most of my career, I had processed thousands of legal filings. I wasn't an attorney, but I knew how official documents were prepared. Margins, page numbering, fonts, initials, recording stamps, notary acknowledgments. Small mistakes often revealed very large lies. Michael had proudly claimed I signed every page, but something about the way he said it bothered me. He had emphasized the signature, not the document itself. Susan interrupted my thoughts. "What exactly did you sign before your trip?" "I signed a limited power of attorney." "What did it authorize?" I answered automatically. "It allowed Michael to pay my property taxes while I was away." "What else?" "He could contact the insurance company if there was storm damage. And he could approve emergency repairs under $25,000. Susan waited. "That's all. No authority to sell. No. No authority to transfer ownership. No. No authority to move you into assisted living." I almost laughed. "Absolutely not." So if he says he has full authority, then something changed. The words hung in the air between us. Something changed, or someone changed it. Around noon, my phone rang. Michael. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Mom? His voice sounded calmer than it had the day before. I think we should talk. We already did. I don't want lawyers involved. Interesting. He had mentioned lawyers before I had. I simply want to clear up the misunderstanding. There isn't one. You haven't even looked at the paperwork. My heart skipped. There is paperwork. Of course. So yesterday, you expected me to leave my home without showing me any documents. Silence. Finally, he sighed. I can bring copies. I'd like that. I'll stop by around 3. Fine. He hesitated again. Mom. Yes. I really am doing this for you. I quietly ended the call. Susan looked at me. Well, he's bringing documents. Her eyebrows lifted. Good. No. Why not? Because if he's confident enough to show them to me. I paused. Then he believes they'll survive close inspection. At exactly 3 o'clock, Michael's pickup truck pulled into Susan's driveway. He walked to the front porch carrying a thick manila envelope. He looked tired. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. For just a moment, I almost saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. Then I remembered the locked door. He sat across from me at Susan's dining table. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he slid the envelope toward me. There. What is it? Everything. I slowly opened it. Inside were several neatly organized documents: a power of attorney, property management authorization, financial authority forms, medical decision forms. Even a document giving Michael broad authority over real estate transactions. Far broader than anything I had ever signed. He folded his arms confidently. See? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I removed my reading glasses. Old habits returned naturally. First, I checked the page numbers. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Then I looked at the footer. Interesting. The first 3 pages contained one formatting style. The 4th page looked different, slightly different margins, different spacing between paragraphs. Almost invisible. Almost. Next, I examined the font. Times New Roman, Times New Roman, Times New Roman, Cambria. My heartbeat slowed, not because I was frightened, because I had found something. I continued reading. Legal terminology appeared unusually sophisticated, too sophisticated. Robert Hayes, the attorney who prepared my original limited authorization, always wrote in plain English whenever possible. These pages sounded like they had been copied from an entirely different legal template. Then I reached the final page. My signature. Real. Without question, I knew every curve of my handwriting. Michael leaned back confidently. You recognize it? Yes. So you admit you signed it? I admit that's my signature. Relief crossed his face. He thought the conversation was over. It had barely begun. I carefully turned back to page 1, then page 2, then page 3. I aligned the edges, very slightly. The paper stock wasn't identical. One page reflected light differently than the others. I quietly asked, "Where is the original?" "You don't need it." I asked where it is. "I have it stored safely. I'd like to examine it." No. That single word told me everything. Amanda, who had remained unusually quiet until then, finally spoke. "Jennifer, surely we don't need to argue over technical details. I looked directly at her. Legal documents are made of technical details. She forced a smile. You signed them. I signed something. Michael's patience began slipping. Mom, stop making this harder. I'm not. You always taught me to respect paperwork. I did. So why won't you accept it now? I met his eyes. Because paperwork tells the truth. His jaw tightened. You think I forged your signature? No. His shoulders relaxed. I don't. Amanda looked relieved as well. Then I finished my sentence. I think someone attached my genuine signature to a document I never agreed to. The room became completely silent. Neither of them spoke. Neither denied it. They simply stared at me. That silence was louder than any confession. I picked up the pages again. There are staple holes. Michael frowned. What? Very tiny ones. I pointed toward the upper left corner. These pages were removed from another packet. Amanda quickly interrupted. That's ridiculous. No. I kept studying the document. The indentation doesn't match. Michael shifted uncomfortably. The paper was scanned. This isn't a scanning issue. I traced one finger gently across the edge. These pages have been restapled. Amanda crossed her arms. You're imagining things. I spent 3 decades reviewing legal filings. I looked directly at my son. I know the difference. Michael stood abruptly. I don't have time for this. No. I gathered the papers neatly into the envelope. You don't. He reached for the envelope. I'll take those. I pulled it back. No. They belong to me. They concern me. I need them. So do I. For a second, I thought he might grab them by force. Instead, he looked toward Amanda. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not here. Not now. Michael exhaled sharply. You'll regret this. I stood. No, Michael. My voice remained calm. I think you're the one who should start worrying. His confident expression finally cracked. Only for a second. But I saw it. For the first time since he had locked me out of my own home. My son realized I wasn't the frightened old woman he expected. He walked out without another word. As I watched his truck disappear down the road, I whispered to Susan, My signature is genuine. She nodded slowly. But the document isn't. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned deception. The morning after Michael left Susan's house, I drove back toward my property. Not to confront him. Not yet. I simply needed to see the land with my own eyes. Susan insisted on coming with me, but I asked her to wait at a small diner a mile away. If Michael saw her, he might assume I was preparing for a legal battle. Right now, I wanted him to believe I was still an emotional mother trying to understand what had happened. Instead, I intended to remember something he had forgotten. The land. I parked my car on the shoulder of the road where the old split-rail fence began. The farmhouse was visible in the distance, standing proudly beneath the towering oak trees William and I had cared for over the years. The porch where he used to whistle every Saturday morning looked the same, but everything else felt different. Construction trucks lined the gravel driveway. Temporary fencing had appeared near the barn. Workers measured sections of the front yard with laser equipment. They weren't renovating a family home. They were preparing a construction site. I remained inside my car for several minutes, watching silently. Then my eyes drifted farther across the property. Beyond the vegetable garden. Beyond the orchard. Beyond the pond where Michael had learned to fish with his father. Lay 14 acres of rolling hills. Every inch of it belonged to one person. Me. A memory suddenly surfaced. I was 8 years old, barefoot, running through those same fields with my father. He stopped beside the largest oak tree and knelt until his eyes met mine. "Jennifer," he had said, "and remembers the people who love it." At 8 years old, I hadn't understood. I thought he was talking about magic. Years later, after my parents passed away, I realized he had meant responsibility. The land wasn't just dirt. It carried history, family, sacrifice, identity. When my father died unexpectedly, my mother inherited everything. After she passed away, 12 years later, I became the sole heir. The transfer happened nearly 3 years before William proposed to me. Because of that timing, the property remained legally mine alone. William never questioned it, not once. The day we married, he looked at me while we stood on the porch of the farmhouse. "This will always be your home," he said. "Our home," I corrected. He smiled. "Our marriage doesn't erase your parents' gift." That was the kind of man William had been. He understood that love didn't require ownership. Over the years, people occasionally asked why we never placed William's name on the deed. He always answered before I could. "Because it isn't necessary." We built our marriage on trust instead of paperwork. Ironically, it was paperwork that threatened to destroy our family after he died. I started the engine and drove away before anyone noticed me. Back at the diner, Susan slid a plate of pancakes toward me. "You were gone longer than expected." "I needed to remember." "What?" "Why my father protected that land so carefully." Susan nodded. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." I looked at her. "You remember the transfer?" "I remember every bit of it. We had worked together when my mother's estate passed through probate. Susan had personally watched me file the final ownership documents. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Michael never paid much attention to legal paperwork." "No, he always left that to William." I stirred my coffee. "Exactly." She leaned forward. "So, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Michael knows the house. But not the property. He believes they're the same thing." Susan smiled. "But legally, they're not. A house could be renovated, occupied, even rented, but ownership of the structure meant very little if someone else owned the ground beneath it." Michael had become obsessed with the farmhouse itself. The wraparound porch, the renovated kitchen, the workshop, the guest cottage. He had forgotten the most valuable asset wasn't the building. It was the land. Susan reached into her purse. "I brought something." She handed me a folded newspaper. The business section. An article had been circled in blue ink. "Asheville Resort Expansion Continues." I began reading. A national development company had recently purchased several neighboring farms. Their plan included luxury vacation homes, hiking trails, restaurants, and private cabins overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. Property values in our area had nearly tripled during the previous 5 years. The article mentioned one specific challenge. The company still needed one central parcel to connect the existing properties. I felt a chill. "Our land," I whispered. Susan nodded. I thought the same thing. The article didn't mention my property by name, but I didn't need it to. I knew exactly where those surrounding parcels were located. Our 14 acres sat directly in the middle. Without them, the developer's expansion would remain incomplete. Suddenly, everything made sense. Michael wasn't simply trying to move me into a retirement community. He wasn't acting because he thought I was lonely. I wasn't worried about me mowing the lawn or repairing the roof. He needed my land, or rather, someone needed him to deliver it. I finished reading the article twice, then 3 times. When I looked up, Susan was already watching me. "What now?" "We verify." She smiled. "I hoped you'd say that." Instead of returning to her house, we drove directly toward the Buncombe County Register of Deeds office. Walking through those familiar doors felt strangely comforting. Although I had retired years earlier, several employees still recognized me. Jennifer, a young clerk, hurried over. "It's so good to see you." "You too, Melissa. What brings you in?" "I need to review a property file." "Of course." Within minutes, we sat in the public records room. Melissa printed the current ownership information without asking unnecessary questions. I carefully examined every page. Parcel number, legal description, transfer history, ownership record. Exactly as I expected. Owner, Jennifer Marie Johnson. Only one name. No joint ownership. No life estate. No transfer on death deed. No recorded sale. No lion giving Michael any ownership rights. Nothing. Susan let out a slow breath. "I guess we know. We know one thing." "What?" "I still own the land." But Michael believes he can sell it." I continued reviewing the electronic records. Then something new appeared. A recently recorded notice. Not a completed sale. A pending transaction. Buyer representation file opened. Representative acting under power of attorney. Representative name Michael Johnson. Purchasing entity Blue Ridge Horizon Development Group. My stomach tightened. The developer finally had a name. Blue Ridge Horizon. Melissa noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm just surprised." She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this." I looked at her. "What?" "There were surveyors asking questions about that property last week." My heart sank. What kind of questions?" "They wanted to confirm parcel boundaries." Susan exchanged a worried glance with me. Surveyors? That meant planning had already begun. Melissa continued quietly. "They seemed excited." "Why?" "They said it would become the centerpiece of something much larger." I thanked her and gathered the documents. Outside, neither Susan nor I spoke until we reached the parking lot. Finally, she broke the silence. "They've already started planning construction." "Yes." "And Michael promised them something he doesn't own." I looked back toward the courthouse. For years, I taught new employees one simple rule. What was it? Never assume the person signing the papers owns the property. Susan smiled faintly. "Looks like someone skipped that lesson." I folded the ownership documents carefully and placed them inside my handbag. For the first time since Michael had changed the locks, I wasn't thinking like a heartbroken mother. I was thinking like the woman who had spent 3 decades protecting property records from fraud. And somewhere in Asheville, a developer believed they were about to purchase 14 beautiful acres. They had no idea the only person who could legally sell that land had never agreed to let it go. I had always believed that desperation could make good people do foolish things. But I also believed that desperation never created character. It simply revealed what had been hiding underneath all along. For 2 days after visiting the Register of Deeds office, I stayed quiet. I didn't call Michael. I didn't answer Amanda's text messages asking if I had calmed down. I didn't contact the developer. Instead, Susan and I began asking careful questions. Small-town communities have long memories. People notice things, especially when a family-owned construction business suddenly begins struggling. Susan's younger brother Frank had spent nearly 40 years supplying building materials throughout Buncombe County. If anyone knew what was happening in Michael's business, it would be him. We met him for breakfast at a small cafe just outside Asheville. Frank looked uncomfortable before we even sat down. "I was wondering when you'd ask," he admitted. "You knew?" I asked. "I knew something was wrong." "How bad?" He sighed heavily. "Worse than most people realize." My stomach tightened. Frank lowered his voice. "Michael's company hasn't paid several suppliers in months." "Months?" He nodded. "I stopped extending credit back in January." I tried to remember. January had been around the time Michael started visiting me more often. At first, I had been touched. He came every Sunday. He repaired a loose gutter. He replaced several porch boards. I even volunteered to mow the fields without charging me. I had thought he simply missed his father. Now I wondered if he had been studying the property instead. Frank continued. He lost the Henderson apartment project. I heard rumors. It was worse than rumors. What happened? The investor pulled out halfway through construction. Michael had already borrowed heavily to begin the project. Without the investor's money, he was left responsible for enormous expenses. Equipment leases, payroll, materials, insurance, everything. How much debt? I asked carefully. Frank hesitated. I don't know the exact number, but I've heard people mention 7 figures. I felt the air leave my lungs. Over $1 million. No wonder he looked exhausted. No wonder Amanda wanted the land sold quickly. Susan leaned forward. Has the bank started collection? Frank nodded. They've already repossessed 2 excavators. And the rest? They're threatening to take everything else. I stared at my untouched coffee. William had warned Michael for years about expanding too quickly. Grow slowly, he always said. A business built too fast collapses just as quickly. Michael hated hearing that. He believed his father lacked ambition. Now William's words echoed inside my mind. Frank wasn't finished. There's something else. What? Michael refinanced his own house. I looked up. He used it as collateral for business loans. Susan quietly muttered, "Oh, Michael." But even that wasn't enough. What do you mean? Frank looked around before answering. Some creditors were promised a major payment before the end of summer. From what? He looked directly at me. They were told your property was under contract. Neither Susan nor I spoke. The silence itself confirmed what we already feared. Michael hadn't merely planned to sell my land. He had promised money that didn't yet exist. Money that belonged to me. When breakfast ended, Susan and I sat inside her car for several minutes. He dug himself into a hole, she finally said. Yes. And now he thinks selling your property is the only ladder out. I nodded slowly. That still doesn't excuse what he did. No. It explains it. Understanding someone's motives wasn't the same as forgiving them. My heart still broke for the little boy I had raised, but the man he had become had made choices. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. Hello. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I heard a quiet voice. Grandma? Emily. Relief flooded through me. Oh, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Her voice trembled. I didn't know. It's okay. No, it isn't. I could hear her crying softly. I thought Dad was just fixing the house. I closed my eyes. Emily. He told me everything would be finished before you came home. When did you realize the truth? The day you came back. What happened? I got home from Sarah's house. She sniffled. The driveway was full of trucks. I asked where you were. Dad said you had decided to move. And you believed him. For about 5 minutes. What changed? I saw your car parked outside. She paused. I watched from my bedroom window. My throat tightened. I saw you standing on the porch. I saw you trying your key. I saw Dad blocking the door. I saw you carrying Grandpa's picture. She began crying again. I wanted to run outside. Why didn't you? Dad wouldn't let me. I struggled to keep my own voice steady. Oh, Emily. I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. Yes, I do. No. I should have stopped them. Sweetheart. I heard them talking. My heartbeat quickened. What do you mean? Emily lowered her voice. I wasn't supposed to. When? Before you came home. What did you hear? They kept arguing. About what? The sale. I sat straighter. What exactly did they say? I don't remember every word. Tell me whatever you remember. Emily took a deep breath. Mom kept saying they had to finish everything before you got back. And Dad, he kept saying you would never forgive him. I remained silent. Mom told him it wouldn't matter once everything was signed. A chill ran through my body. Emily continued. She said you'd eventually accept it because you loved Dad too much to fight. My fingers tightened around the phone. What else? They talked about money. What kind of money? Dad said once the developer paid. She stopped. Everything would finally be okay. There it was, confirmation. Not speculation, not rumor. My own granddaughter had heard it herself. Emily? Yes. Did they ever mention the developer's name? I think. She hesitated. Blue Ridge something. Blue Ridge Horizon. Exactly the company listed in the county records. My pulse quickened. Then Emily said something that changed everything. Grandma? Yes. I saw Mom in your office. My breathing stopped. When? The day after you left for Maine. What was she doing? I don't know. Think carefully. She had your filing cabinet open. My stomach turned. Was Dad there? No. What was Amanda doing? Taking pictures. Pictures. With her phone. Of what? Your papers. I slowly stood from the kitchen table. What papers? I couldn't see. Emily swallowed nervously. But later. Later what? I saw her carrying a blue folder. The blue folder. Every important property document I owned had been stored inside a blue expanding file. Deeds, tax records, insurance, power of attorney, everything. Did she put it back? I don't know. My mind raced. If Amanda had photographed those documents, she had everything she needed. Signatures, legal descriptions, recording information, reference numbers. Enough information to reconstruct almost any legal document. Emily interrupted my thoughts. Grandma, I'm here. I don't think Dad wanted to hurt you. I know, but he kept saying there wasn't another way. Those words pierced my heart more deeply than anything else. Not another way. There is always another way. Borrow more time. Sell equipment. Declare bankruptcy. Downsize. Start over. None of those options required stealing from your mother. Emily. Yes. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't argue with your parents. But listen carefully. I don't want you caught in the middle. They're already fighting. I know. If they find out I called, they won't. I deleted the call. Smart girl. I love you, Grandma. Tears finally filled my eyes. I love you too. More than anything, after we hung up, I sat motionless for a long time. Susan quietly placed a hand on my shoulder. Well, I looked at her. They searched my office. She frowned. They photographed my files. Her expression hardened immediately. So, Amanda knew exactly where every legal document was. Yes. And Michael. I stared out the window. I still don't know whether he followed her, or whether he was leading the way. One thing, however, had become painfully clear. This wasn't a desperate decision made overnight. It had been planned, step by step, long before I packed my suitcase for Maine. And somewhere inside that carefully prepared plan was the mistake that would eventually bring the entire deception crashing down. I spent the next morning sitting at Susan's dining room table with legal pads spread in front of me. For years, that had been how I solved difficult problems. Not with anger, not with assumptions, with timelines. People lied. Documents lied. But time rarely did. I drew a straight line across the top page and began writing dates. January. Michael suddenly became unusually attentive. He offered to help around the property. He volunteered to pay bills online. He insisted I stop worrying about small paperwork. February. Amanda visited more often. She offered to organize my office. She even bought me a new filing cabinet because she claimed the old one looked outdated. I had thanked her. Now I wondered if she simply wanted to know where everything was kept. March. Michael mentioned that property values had increased dramatically. He casually asked whether I had ever considered selling. I laughed and told him William and I had built our lives there. "I'll leave this place feet first," I had joked. He hadn't laughed. April. He suggested I finally take a vacation. "You deserve it, Mom. I'll watch everything. You don't need to worry." I had believed every word. Looking back, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Nothing had happened by accident. Everything had happened in sequence. Susan leaned over my shoulder. "You've built quite a timeline. It's incomplete. What are you missing?" The trigger. What finally pushed them into action? She thought for a moment. The debt. Maybe. But something forced them to act before you came home. I tapped my pen against the table. They were in a hurry. A huge hurry. That bothered me more than anything. If they had been planning this for months, why risk rushing through everything while I was only gone for 3 weeks? Something had changed. Something with a deadline. My phone rang before I could think further. The screen displayed a familiar name. Robert Hayes, my attorney. The same attorney who had prepared my original limited power of attorney. I answered immediately. "Robert." "Jennifer." His calm voice always reminded me of William. "I just received your message. I need your help." I gathered that. "I think someone altered legal documents." A long silence followed. Finally, he asked one simple question. "Did you bring me copies?" "Not yet." "Can you?" "I'll be there within the hour." Robert's office looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. Dark wooden shelves, leather chairs, family photographs. Nothing flashy, nothing intimidating. He welcomed me into his conference room and patiently listened while I explained everything from beginning to end. He interrupted only once. "When Michael claimed he had full authority." "Yes." "Did he ever show you the original document?" "No." Robert nodded slowly. "I suspected as much." I handed him the copies Michael had left. Without speaking, Robert adjusted his glasses and began reading. Unlike me, he wasn't looking at formatting. He examined the legal language itself. Every sentence, every paragraph, every signature block. Nearly 15 minutes passed before he finally looked up. "Jennifer." "Yes. Your instincts were correct." Relief washed over me. "You see it too." "Oh, yes." He placed 2 pages side by side. "This section wasn't written by me." He pointed to a paragraph granting broad authority over real estate transactions. I never use this wording. You don't? No. Why not? Because it's unnecessarily broad. He opened one of his filing cabinets and removed another document. This is your actual limited power of attorney. He laid it beside Michael's copy. The difference was obvious. Robert's original document contained only 4 pages. Michael's version contained 7. 3 entirely new pages had appeared. They inserted additional authority. Yes. But I frowned. My signature is real. Robert nodded. I believe that. How? They likely copied your signature page from the legitimate document. My stomach turned. So, you signed one document. They attached the signature to another. Would that be fraud? Robert looked directly into my eyes. If proven? He paused. It would be extremely serious. He photocopied both versions and highlighted every difference. Additional paragraphs, changed page numbers, different formatting, inconsistent spacing. Even the notary acknowledgement had subtle discrepancies. Robert suddenly stopped writing. Wait. What? He reached for a magnifying glass. The notary seal. What about it? He leaned closer. This isn't right. My heartbeat quickened. What do you see? The commission expiration date. I leaned forward. So, it expired 8 months ago. What? He nodded. This notary commission was no longer valid on the day these papers were supposedly signed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Robert slowly removed his glasses. If this copy accurately reflects the original. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The document wasn't merely suspicious. It contained an impossible notarization. As we continued reviewing the paperwork, Robert suddenly asked, Who introduced Michael to the developer? I don't know. You should find out. Why? Because someone with experience probably told him this plan would work. You think someone helped them? I think very few ordinary people understand complex real estate transactions. That thought had never occurred to me. Michael knew construction. Amanda worked in marketing. Neither possessed advanced legal knowledge. Someone had helped. Someone who understood deeds, property transfers, power of attorney. The question was, who? As I prepared to leave Robert's office, his assistant knocked gently. Robert? Yes. A gentleman is here asking about Jennifer Johnson. Robert frowned. Did he give a name? He said Daniel Carter. The name immediately caught my attention. Blue Ridge Horizon. Daniel Carter, the developer. Robert looked at me. Are you expecting him? No. Would you like me to send him away? I thought for a moment. No. I'd rather hear what he wants. Daniel Carter entered the conference room carrying an expensive leather briefcase. He appeared to be in his late 50s. Perfectly tailored suit, confident smile, the kind of businessman accustomed to closing million-dollar deals. The moment he saw me, however, something changed. His smile faded. You, he said quietly. I wasn't expecting you to be here. I imagine not. He looked toward Robert. I apologize. I thought... He stopped himself. You thought what? I asked. He hesitated. I believed the transaction had already been approved. My voice remained calm. What transaction? The purchase agreement. There is no purchase agreement. His forehead creased. I've already seen the authorization. Robert immediately spoke. May I ask what authorization? Daniel slowly opened his briefcase. I received copies from Michael Johnson. He removed several documents. One of them looked painfully familiar. My signature. Again. Robert reached across the table. May I? Daniel handed him the papers. Less than 30 seconds later, Robert quietly whispered, This isn't the same version? What? Robert laid Daniel's document beside Michael's copy. The room fell silent. There were now 3 different versions of the same power of attorney. Each one granted different powers. Each one contained my genuine signature. Each one had been altered differently. Daniel stared in disbelief. What is this? Robert looked directly at him. I believe you've been given fraudulent documents. Color drained from Daniel's face. He looked at me. I had no idea. You were negotiating with my son. Yes. He told us you had decided to retire permanently. I never said that. He said you wanted to move into assisted living. I never agreed. He assured us the family supported the sale. I slowly shook my head. No one ever asked me. Daniel sank back into his chair. For the first time since entering the room, he looked genuinely disturbed. I've already invested nearly $200,000 in preliminary planning. I understand. If these documents are false. He stopped speaking. Robert finished the sentence for him. Then your company has been deceived as well. Daniel remained silent for several seconds before quietly asking, Mrs. Johnson. Yes. Would you be willing to tell me exactly what happened? I looked at Robert, then back at Daniel. For the first time, the man who believed he was buying my family's land was finally listening to the only person who actually owned it, and I intended to tell him every single detail. Daniel Carter closed the conference room door behind him. The confident developer who had walked into Robert Hayes's office only minutes earlier was gone. In his place sat a man who suddenly realized his company might have stepped into the middle of a family fraud. He loosened his tie and took a slow breath. I think we should start over, he said. Robert nodded. I agree. Daniel looked directly at me. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm the acquisitions director for Blue Ridge Horizon Development Group. I know. I owe you an apology. You didn't lock me out of my house. No. You didn't pack my belongings. No. You didn't forge my authority. No. I folded my hands calmly. But your company accepted documents without verifying them with the owner. He lowered his eyes. That's true. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Daniel reached into his briefcase again. This is everything Michael has given us over the last 3 months. He placed a thick folder on the conference table. 3 months, I repeated. Yes. So discussions began long before I left for Maine. I'm afraid so. Robert quietly slid the folder toward me. Inside were emails, property surveys, architectural sketches, environmental reports, traffic studies, even preliminary resort layouts. I stared at one large color rendering. My farmhouse wasn't there. The barn wasn't there. William's workshop wasn't there. The orchard had disappeared. Even the pond where Michael had caught his first fish had been replaced with luxury rental cabins. It looked as though our entire family history had simply been erased with a computer mouse. Daniel noticed my expression. I'm sorry. I looked up. When did Michael first contact your company? Daniel checked one of the printed emails. January 12th. January. Exactly when Frank had said Michael's business problems became severe. He approached us. You didn't approach him. No. He said his family was interested in selling a unique property. What exactly did he tell you? Daniel found another page. He stated that he represented the owner. I couldn't help shaking my head. He represented himself. Daniel continued reading. He also claimed the property transfer would be completed before closing. Robert interrupted. Did he ever identify Jennifer as unwilling? No. He repeatedly assured us the family was in complete agreement. I let out a slow breath. Michael hadn't simply lied to me. He had lied to everyone. Daniel opened another folder. There's something else you should probably see. He slid a signed memorandum across the table. At the bottom sat Michael's signature. Beside it was another signature. Amanda Johnson. Robert immediately frowned. They signed jointly. Daniel nodded. They presented themselves as acting together under valid authority. I looked closer. Then something caught my attention. What date is this? Daniel looked down. June 8th. I frowned. I was already in Maine. Yes. And according to this, I pointed toward the page. They were promising possession of the property within 30 days. Daniel nodded slowly. That was the proposed timeline. 30 days. Everything suddenly fit together. That explained the rush. That explained the new locks. That explained the packed boxes. That explained the retirement apartment deposit. Everything had been carefully scheduled around one deadline. The developer expected possession before the end of the month. Susan had been right. Michael wasn't rushing because of me. He was rushing because of a contract. Robert leaned back in his chair. Mr. Carter. Yes. When was your next payment scheduled? Daniel hesitated. I shouldn't disclose. Robert remained silent. Daniel sighed. I suppose there's little point hiding it now. He opened another spreadsheet. Michael requested a $1 million advance. I stared at him. $1 million. He said construction financing depended on it. And did you approve it? Not entirely. How much? $200,000. My heart sank. Frank had mentioned preliminary planning costs. Now I understood. Blue Ridge Horizon had already advanced $200,000 based on paperwork they believed was legitimate. Where did the money go? I asked. Daniel answered quietly. According to Michael, he checked another document. Equipment debt, overdue payroll supplier balances, and tax obligations. Exactly as Frank had described. Michael wasn't getting rich. I was trying to stop his business from collapsing. But he was doing it with money that didn't belong to him. Daniel suddenly looked uncomfortable. There is one thing I haven't mentioned. What? I've met your granddaughter. My eyes widened. Emily. Yes. When? About 2 weeks ago. Robert and I exchanged a glance. Daniel explained. I visited the property with Michael. He wanted to show us the boundaries. Emily came outside while we were walking. What happened? Daniel smiled faintly. She asked if we were buying Grandpa's fishing pond. My throat tightened. I told her I didn't know. She said something strange. What did she say? Grandpa said nobody should ever sell the hills. I closed my eyes. William. Even after his death, he had unknowingly left warnings behind. Daniel continued. I asked Michael about it. What did he say? He laughed. What exactly? Dad was sentimental. The words stung. William hadn't been sentimental. He had been wise. Daniel looked genuinely ashamed. I should have questioned everything at that moment. No, I said softly. You trusted the information you were given. I still should have verified it. Robert finally spoke. The law generally expects buyers to verify ownership before closing. Daniel nodded. I understand. And we hadn't reached closing. No, we were still in due diligence. That was fortunate. Very fortunate. No deed had been recorded. No ownership had changed. The damage was serious. but it could still be stopped. Daniel suddenly reached into the folder one final time. I almost forgot. He handed me a business card. Written across the back in Michael's handwriting was a single name. Calvin Reed's handwriting was a single name. Calvin Reed. I frowned. Who's Calvin Reed? Daniel answered immediately. The independent land consultant who introduced Michael to us. Robert's expression changed instantly. I know that name. You do? Robert nodded slowly. He used to work in commercial real estate. What happened? He lost his broker's license years ago. Daniel looked shocked. I was told he was still consulting. He is. Robert's voice hardened. But not as a licensed broker. I felt a chill spread through my body. So someone with experience? Robert finished my sentence. Helped Michael build this entire scheme. The room became silent. Until now, I had believed this was simply a desperate son making terrible choices. Now, another possibility emerged. Someone else, someone who understood real estate law, someone with a history of questionable business practices, might have been directing everything from the shadows. Daniel slowly closed his briefcase. I want you to know something, Mrs. Johnson. What? If fraud occurred? He looked directly into my eyes. Blue Ridge Horizon will not continue this transaction. For the first time in days, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. The developer was no longer my enemy. He might become my strongest witness. As Robert gathered every altered document into a single evidence folder, he looked at me and said quietly, Jennifer. Yes. I think we've just discovered this story is much bigger than a family betrayal. I looked down at the name written on the business card, Calvin Reed, a stranger, a disgraced real estate consultant, and perhaps the man who had convinced my own son that stealing from his mother was just another business deal. That evening, I sat alone on the small guest room porch behind Susan's house. The sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Normally, sunsets had always brought me peace. Tonight, they only reminded me of another sunset years ago. William and I had been sitting on our own porch after finishing the fence along the north pasture. He had wrapped one arm around my shoulders and asked, Promise me something. What? If I'm gone before you? I immediately interrupted him. Don't talk like that. He smiled. Humor me. I rolled my eyes. Fine. Promise you'll never let anyone convince you that this land is just property. I laughed. Who would ever do that? He looked across the fields. Someone who only sees dollar signs. At the time, I thought he was talking about developers. I never imagined he might also have meant our own family. The next morning, Robert called before breakfast. I've done some digging. About Calvin Reed. Yes. What did you find? You should come to my office. His tone was unusually serious. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Robert already had several files spread across the conference table when I arrived. Susan accompanied me this time. Robert pointed toward the first folder. Calvin Reed was once one of the most successful commercial land brokers in western North Carolina. What happened? He became creative. Susan frowned. What does that mean? Robert slid a newspaper clipping toward us. Real estate consultant fined for misrepresentation. The article described multiple civil lawsuits. None involved criminal convictions, but the accusations were remarkably similar. Misleading elderly land owners. Questionable contract language. Incomplete disclosures. Aggressive acquisition tactics. He specialized in older property owners, I whispered. Robert nodded. Especially those with valuable rural land. Another clipping described his real estate license being revoked after repeated ethical violations. He couldn't legally broker sales anymore, so he became a consultant instead. Exactly. Technically legal, practically dangerous. I slowly flipped through the documents. One article caught my attention. Calvin had once partnered with several regional development companies, including Blue Ridge Horizon. I looked at Daniel's business card again. So Daniel knows him? Robert nodded. They've worked together before. Do you think Daniel is involved? I don't know. His answer was honest. We shouldn't assume. I appreciated that. After everything that had happened, assumptions were dangerous. Facts mattered. Around noon, Daniel unexpectedly called. Mrs. Johnson. Yes. I think we need to meet again. What happened? I reviewed our internal emails. And there are conversations you should probably see. Robert agreed immediately. 1 hour later, the four of us met inside Blue Ridge Horizon's Asheville office. The building overlooked downtown. Modern glass walls, steel beams, expensive artwork, very different from the farmhouse William and I had built with our own hands. Daniel led us into a private conference room. I stayed here until nearly midnight. He opened his laptop. I searched every email involving your property. He projected several messages onto a large screen. The earliest emails appeared normal. Property boundaries, environmental studies, utility access. Then the tone changed. An email from Calvin Reed appeared. Jennifer Johnson is elderly and emotionally attached to the property. Work primarily through Michael. Direct negotiations with the owner will only complicate the closing. Robert quietly asked, Did anyone question this? Daniel shook his head. No. Another email appeared. Once POA documentation is finalized, proceed immediately before circumstances change. Then another. Delay increases risk. My heart pounded. They were planning around me. Daniel nodded sadly. I'm afraid so. Susan crossed her arms. They never intended to ask Jennifer. No. They intended to avoid her. Daniel looked genuinely ashamed. Yes. Robert suddenly spoke. Scroll down. Daniel opened another thread. My eyes widened. The sender wasn't Calvin. It was Michael. Mom must never know about Phase 2 until after closing. The room became silent. Susan whispered, Phase 2. Daniel clicked the attachment. A master development plan filled the screen. Luxury cabins, private roads, clubhouse, artificial lake, retail shops, walking trails. Estimated investment, $86 million. I stared in disbelief. My family's land wasn't a small piece of the project. It was the center of it. Without those 14 acres, the roads couldn't connect, the utilities couldn't cross, the cabins couldn't be built. Everything depended on my property. Robert quietly leaned toward me. Now we know why they were willing to risk everything. They weren't buying a farmhouse. They were buying the entire project's future. Daniel continued opening files. Then he stopped. I don't remember seeing this before. What is it? A recorded meeting. He clicked the audio file. Voices filled the conference room. Michael, Calvin, someone else. Probably one of Blue Ridge Horizon's junior acquisition managers. Calvin's voice was calm. The mother is sentimental. Michael sighed. I know. Then stop asking permission. I don't want to hurt her. You aren't hurting her. There was a pause. You're protecting your future. Michael remained silent. Calvin continued. Once the documents are signed, she'll be angry for a while. Then she'll move on. Another pause. The money solves everything. I closed my eyes. William had spent years teaching Michael that integrity mattered more than profit. Now another man had spent only a few months convincing him otherwise. Daniel immediately stopped the recording. "I'm sorry." "No." I opened my eyes. "Keep it." Robert nodded. "That recording may become important." As the meeting ended, Daniel walked us toward the lobby. Before we reached the elevators, a receptionist hurried over. "Mr. Carter." "Yes. A gentleman is asking for you." "Who?" "Calvin Reed." Daniel froze. "When?" "He's downstairs." Robert looked at me. "What would you like to do?" I thought carefully. "No. No. Don't tell him I'm here." Daniel nodded. "I can do that." "But—" I looked toward the elevator. I'd like to see him, without being seen myself. Daniel led us to a second-floor balcony overlooking the reception area. From there we had a clear view below. A tall man in his early 60s stood near the front desk. Perfectly pressed gray suit, silver watch, confident posture. He smiled constantly, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wasn't nervous. I wasn't worried. He looked like a man expecting another successful business meeting. Then he checked his watch. Moments later, Michael walked through the front entrance. I instinctively stepped farther behind the balcony railing. Neither of them knew I was watching. Calvin shook Michael's hand. The two men spoke quietly for a moment. Then Calvin handed him a thick brown envelope. Michael looked inside. His face immediately changed. He appeared frightened, not excited, not relieved, afraid. He said something I couldn't hear. Calvin answered with a smile. Then he gently patted Michael's shoulder. It wasn't the gesture of a partner. It was the gesture of someone giving instructions, someone in control. Robert whispered beside me. "Do you see it?" "Yes." "Michael isn't running this." I slowly nodded. "No. He never was." As Michael tucked the envelope under his arm and hurried toward the exit, I realized something chilling. Whatever was inside that envelope. Calvin believed it would force my son to keep moving forward, and for the first time, I wondered whether Michael had become more than dishonest. I wondered whether he had become trapped. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid, because I couldn't stop thinking about the expression on Michael's face when Calvin handed him that brown envelope. It wasn't greed. It wasn't excitement. It was fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, I asked myself a question I had been too angry to consider. Was my son being manipulated? That question didn't excuse what he had done. Changing the locks, packing my belongings, lying to me. Those were still his choices, but perhaps someone else had been steering those choices from the beginning. At 8 o'clock the following morning, Robert called. "I have a favor to ask." "What is it?" "I'd like you to stay away from Michael today." "Why?" "I've arranged something." "What?" "A meeting." "With who?" "Daniel and someone from Blue Ridge Horizon's legal department." I frowned. "They're cooperating. They're very interested in protecting themselves." That made sense. If fraudulent documents had been used to secure an $86 million development, the company had every reason to uncover the truth before the scandal reached the newspapers. By noon, Robert, Daniel, Susan, and I sat inside another conference room at Blue Ridge Horizon. This time, a woman joined us. "My name is Linda Morrison," she said. "I'm general counsel for Blue Ridge Horizon." She was composed, direct, and spoke very little. The kind of attorney who chose every word carefully. She opened a thick binder. "We completed an internal review overnight." "And?" Robert asked. Linda looked directly at me. "Mrs. Johnson?" "Yes." "First, I'd like to apologize." I nodded politely. "Second, She paused. Our company is suspending every transaction involving your property. A weight lifted from my shoulders. No construction. No purchase. No financing. No planning. Everything stops immediately. Robert smiled faintly. Good decision. Linda continued. We've also frozen the remaining $800,000 that Mr. Johnson requested. I blinked. So he hasn't received it? No, only the initial $200,000 advance had been paid. The remaining funds would not be released. Michael didn't know it yet, but the money he had been counting on was gone. Linda slid another folder across the table. We found something else. Inside were expense reports, invoices, consulting agreements. One line immediately caught my eye. Consulting fee, Calvin Reed, $175,000. Daniel frowned. I didn't approve that. Linda nodded. It came from another department. When? 3 months ago. For what? She turned another page. Strategic Acquisition Consulting. Robert quietly asked, What exactly did he consult on? Linda answered honestly. We're still trying to determine that. An investigator entered the room carrying another file. Sorry I'm late. Linda introduced him. This is Mark Ellis. He wasn't related to me despite sharing the last name. Mark worked in corporate compliance. He sat down and immediately opened his notebook. I interviewed 6 employees this morning. What did they say? Daniel asked. Most described Calvin the same way. How he insisted on handling Jennifer Johnson's property personally. Robert exchanged a glance with me. Personally, Mark nodded. He repeatedly instructed employees not to contact the owner. My stomach tightened. So this wasn't just Michael. No. Mark flipped another page. One employee remembered Calvin saying, he checked his notes. The mother is emotional. The son is practical. Silence filled the room. I almost laughed. Practical Michael had nearly destroyed his own life. There was nothing practical about that. The meeting lasted another hour. As we prepared to leave, my phone vibrated. Emily. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice sounded panicked. Grandma. What happened? Dad's really upset. Why? I don't know. What do you mean? He came home yelling. At who? Mom. I leaned against the wall. What were they arguing about? The money. My heartbeat quickened. What money? He kept saying. She paused, trying to remember. They froze everything. Exactly as Linda had just announced. Michael already knew. Emily continued. Mom kept asking what they were going to do now. And Dad said Calvin promised he'd fix it. That sentence caught my attention immediately. Calvin promised he'd fix it. Not, we'll fix it. Not, I'll fix it. Calvin, the man still giving instructions. Grandma. I'm here. I think Dad's scared. Why do you say that? I've never seen him like this. What is he doing? He's pacing. Anything else? He keeps checking that brown envelope. The envelope. I remembered watching Calvin hand it to him in the lobby. What does it look like? I don't know. He won't let Mom touch it. Interesting, very interesting. What else? Emily lowered her voice. I heard one more thing. What? He told Mom. She hesitated. If Jennifer gets those papers, we're finished. Those papers, not paperwork. Papers. Plural. Something inside that envelope mattered. A lot. After ending the call, I immediately returned to the conference room. Robert noticed my expression. What happened? I explained everything Emily had heard. Daniel leaned forward. The envelope. Linda nodded slowly. Whatever is inside? It's important, Mark added. It may even explain Calvin's role. Robert looked at me. Jennifer. Yes. I think we need to know what's inside that envelope. I agree. But we can't simply take it. No. We need another way. That opportunity came sooner than any of us expected. At approximately 4 o'clock that afternoon, Susan's phone rang. She answered, listened quietly, then covered the receiver. It's Frank. What happened? He says Mike just left the construction yard. So, he left in such a hurry. She paused. He forgot something. What? A document tube. Robert frowned. What kind? Frank had already answered through the phone. Blueprints. Blueprints? For the development, Susan asked another question. Then she looked at me. Frank says Michael asked him to lock the office until tomorrow morning. Why? He didn't say. Robert stood. I'd like to see those blueprints. So would I. Within 30 minutes, we arrived at Michael's construction office. Frank unlocked the building. I haven't touched anything. The office looked exactly as Michael had left it. Coffee cup still warm. Computer monitor glowing. Calculator on the desk. Stacks of unpaid invoices. The forgotten blueprint tube rested beside the drafting table. Robert carefully opened it. Large architectural drawings rolled across the table. Roads, utility lines, drainage plans, luxury cabins, exactly as expected. Then Susan pointed toward the bottom corner. What's that? There, almost hidden beneath the last sheet, was another folded document, not a blueprint, a handwritten map. Old, yellowed. The paper looked decades older than everything else. I unfolded it carefully. The moment I saw it, my heart stopped. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Williams. Across the top, he had written only 6 words. Do not show until necessary. Beneath those words was a detailed hand-drawn map of our property, near the western boundary. William had circled one location in red ink. Next to it, he had written, Original Johnson Survey Marker. Robert looked at me. What is that? I whispered the answer. My father buried the original survey monument there. Everyone stared at me. I slowly looked back down at William's map. Then another realization struck me. If William had hidden this map, then he must have known something decades ago. Something about our land that none of us, not even Michael, had ever understood. For several seconds, no one in the room said a word. The old map rested on the drafting table between us. Its edges were brittle. The paper had yellowed with age. But William's handwriting was unmistakable. Strong, neat, careful, exactly as I remembered. I gently traced my finger across the words. Do not show until necessary. Susan looked at me. You've never seen this before. I slowly shook my head. Never. Robert adjusted his glasses. When do you think William drew it? I studied the faded ink. The paper is old, but the handwriting isn't. What do you mean? The map itself was probably copied from one of my father's original surveys. And William added the notes later. Robert nodded. That makes sense. I looked closer. The map showed every field, every creek, every fence line, every tree line. Then I noticed something unusual. Near the western edge of the property, William had drawn a second circle. Not around the survey marker, around a narrow strip of land nearly 50 feet wide. What is this? Susan asked. I leaned closer. The label was barely visible. Access easement. My heart skipped. No. Robert looked at me. You recognize it. I think so. More than 30 years earlier, just after William and I married. My father had invited us into his workshop. He spread several old surveys across his workbench. Most people only read deeds, he had said. They forget to read the surveys. William smiled. I'll remember. My father pointed toward a thin line crossing the western pasture. This strip must never disappear. I frowned. Why? Because it guarantees legal access. To what? He simply smiled. You'll understand one day. At the time, neither William nor I had asked more questions. The easement had existed long before either of us was born. It wasn't important. Or so we thought. I looked back at William's map. The access easement, the original survey marker. Why had he highlighted both? Robert interrupted my thoughts. I think we should compare this to the county records. I agree. Within 20 minutes, we were back at the Register of Deeds office. Melissa greeted us with another smile. Back again. I'm afraid so. She laughed. What are we looking for today? Robert answered. Historic surveys. Her eyebrows rose. How historic? As old as you've got. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Leather-bound record books lined one wall. Melissa disappeared for nearly 15 minutes before returning with several oversized map folders. These go back to the 1940s. I carefully opened the first one. Nothing. The second. Nothing. Then, the third folder. There it was. A survey dated 1958, prepared for my grandfather. I carefully spread it across the table. Susan leaned over my shoulder. It's almost identical. Almost. Robert immediately noticed the difference. The easement. I nodded. It continues. He pointed farther west. It doesn't stop at your property. I followed the thin ink line. It crossed our western boundary, continued through neighboring farmland, then connected directly to what was now Blue Ridge Horizon's largest acquisition. Daniel stared in disbelief. So? He looked back at the survey. Every vehicle entering the resort would legally need that access, Robert answered before I could. Unless another legal route exists. Daniel already knew the answer. There isn't. I looked at him. How do you know? Because we spent nearly 8 months studying traffic access. He slowly smiled. This changes everything. Melissa returned, carrying another folder. I found something else. She placed an old deed on the table. This references the easement. Robert carefully unfolded it. His eyes widened. Oh. What? I asked. He handed me the document. A single sentence had been underlined decades earlier. The easement shall remain under the sole authority of the Johnson family and may not be relocated without written consent of the current owner. I read it twice, then a third time. Susan whispered, You're the current owner. Yes. Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair. My entire road plan. He stopped. Runs through that easement. Robert looked toward him. And Jennifer never consented. No. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. We can't legally build that entrance. The room fell completely silent. For the first time, I truly understood what William had protected. Not just the land, control. Daniel suddenly began laughing. Not because anything was funny, because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. We've spent nearly $600,000 designing that entrance. Robert smiled slightly. And it can't exist. Not without Jennifer. Daniel looked at me. You realize what this means? I think so. You now possess the single most valuable piece of leverage in this entire project. I didn't answer immediately. William had known. Somehow, he had known. As we packed the historic documents away, my phone buzzed again. Emily. I answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Grandma? She sounded nervous. I found something. What? I think Dad hid the brown envelope. My heartbeat quickened. Where? In Grandpa's workshop. I looked at Susan, then at Robert. Are you sure? Yes. I saw him put it behind the old tool cabinet. When? This morning. Did anyone else see? I don't think so. She lowered her voice. Grandma? Yes. I also heard Dad talking to Calvin. My pulse quickened again. What did he say? He said, she paused. If Jennifer finds William's survey, the deal is dead. Every person around the table froze. Robert slowly lowered his pen. He knows about the survey, I whispered. So did Calvin, Emily continued. Dad asked if they should destroy it. A chill ran through my body. And Calvin said, she swallowed. Don't worry. She'll never know where William hid it. I looked down at the map resting in front of me. Too late. William had hidden it well enough, but not forever. Emily's voice trembled. Grandma, I'm here. Please be careful. I will. I don't trust Calvin. Neither did I. Not anymore. After ending the call, Robert quietly gathered every historic document into a secure evidence folder. We're making copies. Today. Daniel nodded. I'll also redesign our entire legal review. Susan smiled. Looks like William planned farther ahead than anyone realized. I looked out the courthouse window toward the distant mountains. William hadn't left me money. He hadn't left me secret accounts. He hadn't left me revenge. He had left me knowledge. The kind of knowledge that could stop an $86 million development without a single lawsuit. But one question still haunted me. If Calvin knew about William's survey, why had he been so certain I would never find it? Then I remembered Emily's words. The brown envelope. Whatever was hidden inside it, it mattered just as much as the survey, perhaps even more. And somehow, both secrets were waiting inside the same property that Michael had locked me out of. I never imagined that one day I would have to sneak onto my own property. Yet there I was, just after sunset, sitting inside Susan's car, a quarter-mile from the farmhouse, watching the lights glow through the familiar windows. It had once been my home. Now it felt like enemy territory. Robert had insisted we wait. No risks, he said. If Michael catches you inside that workshop, everything becomes emotional. I know. So, we do this carefully. Daniel had arranged for a private investigator named Greg Lawson to accompany us. Greg had spent 25 years with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation before retiring. He wasn't there to confront anyone. He was there to observe, to document, to remember every detail. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Emily texted me. Dad and Mom just left. They said they'll be back after dinner with Calvin. I stared at the message. Dinner with Calvin. Even now, with Blue Ridge Horizon freezing the project, Michael was still meeting him. That alone told me who was truly in control. Greg checked his watch. This is our window. Susan looked at me. Are you ready? I wasn't. No mother is ever ready to walk into her own home like a stranger. But I nodded anyway. The back gate still opened the same way. Lift slightly. Push inward. William had repaired that hinge dozens of times. Greg moved first, quietly crossing the yard. Robert followed. Susan stayed beside me. The barn stood exactly where it always had. The old red paint had faded. One shutter still leaned slightly to the left because William insisted it gave the building character. I smiled despite everything. Some things refused to change. We reached the workshop. The side door was unlocked. Greg carefully photographed it before opening it. Inside, everything smelled exactly as I remembered. fresh-cut cedar, machine oil, leather. William's workbench remained against the far wall. His favorite hammer still hung from the pegboard. His reading glasses rested exactly where he had left them before his final hospital visit. I had never found the strength to move them. Susan quietly squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, just remembering. Greg turned on a small flashlight. "We're looking for the cabinet Emily described." It didn't take long. The old green tool cabinet stood beside the workbench. Heavy steel. 4 drawers. 1 tall side compartment. Exactly where it had always been. I slowly opened the side compartment. Empty. My heart sank. "It's gone." Robert checked behind the cabinet. Nothing. Greg searched underneath. Still nothing. Susan frowned. "Maybe Michael moved it." "No." Emily had sounded certain. I leaned against the workbench, trying to think. William always said one thing. "When you can't find something, stop looking where everyone else would." I closed my eyes. Then I smiled. "He built this cabinet." Robert looked at me. "So, he never trusted factory storage." I ran my hand along the back panel. Solid steel. Then, a tiny wooden knob, hidden beneath the cabinet frame. No one would notice it unless they already knew it existed. I gently pulled. A narrow, false compartment slid open. Susan gasped. Inside rested the brown envelope, exactly where Emily said it would be. For several seconds, none of us touched it. Greg photographed everything. The hidden compartment, the envelope, the location. Only after documenting every angle did Robert carefully lift it out. Across the front, written in thick black marker, were 4 words. "Confidential. Original files." Robert looked at me. "Open it." I nodded. Inside were several documents: construction contracts, financial statements, loan agreements. Nothing surprising. Then, a sealed manila folder. My name appeared across the front. Jennifer Johnson, in William's handwriting. My hands began shaking. Robert quietly handed it to me. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dearest Jennifer, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped never would. I pray I'm wrong. But if someone is trying to separate you from this land, remember one thing. Don't fight with emotion. Fight with facts." Tears blurred my vision. William's handwriting looked as steady as ever. I continued reading. "There is one document I never told anyone about." I frowned. "One document, not even Michael knows it exists." Robert leaned closer. I kept reading. "Years ago, your father asked me to keep a certified copy of the original boundary agreement between the Johnson family and the county." Boundary agreement, I looked up. Robert's eyes widened. "Keep reading." "Your father believed someone might someday challenge the Western Access easement. He asked me to hide the certified copy somewhere only you could eventually find it." A folded sheet slipped from the letter. Robert immediately unfolded it. His eyebrows shot upward. "This," he looked at me, "is extraordinary." It wasn't merely a survey. It was a certified, county-certified boundary agreement. Signed, recorded, stamped. More importantly, attached to the final page was another document, an easement maintenance agreement. Robert read it silently. Then he slowly smiled. "What is it?" Susan asked. He looked almost amused. "Blue Ridge Horizon has a much bigger problem than they realize." The maintenance agreement contained a clause no one had noticed. Not Daniel, not Calvin, Not even me, it stated. Any owner benefiting from the Johnson easement is responsible for all maintenance costs, environmental protection, drainage improvements, and restoration expenses associated with increased commercial traffic. Daniel, who had joined us only minutes earlier after arriving separately, read the clause twice. "Oh. What?" I asked. He looked almost embarrassed. "Our financial model? What about it? It assumes the county maintains that access road." Robert smiled. "But they don't." "No." Daniel looked back at the agreement. "The benefiting party does. Which means—" Daniel quickly performed calculations on his phone. His expression changed dramatically. "This can't be right." "What?" He turned the screen toward us. "If the resort uses that easement, maintenance alone would exceed $8 million over the first 15 years. Susan stared. $8 million? Minimum. The expensive entrance everyone wanted would become one of the most expensive liabilities in the project. But William's letter wasn't finished. I continued reading. "Jennifer, if Michael ever forgets that people matter more than property..." My throat tightened. "Please remember, he is still our son. Hold him accountable. But if God gives him a chance to become the man we raised, don't let your anger steal that chance from him." I lowered the letter. No one spoke. William understood. Even years before his death, he had somehow imagined this possibility. Not the details, but the temptation, the conflict between money and family. Greg suddenly interrupted. "Someone's coming." Every head turned. Headlights swept across the barn windows. A vehicle had entered the driveway. Daniel immediately turned off his flashlight. Robert carefully returned every document to the envelope. Greg whispered, "Stay quiet." We stood motionless inside the dark workshop. Car doors slammed outside. Then voices. Michael, Amanda, and Calvin. They were walking toward the workshop. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Michael's voice sounded anxious. "I left it in here." Calvin answered sharply. "Then find it." "I thought I hid it." "You clearly didn't." Their footsteps grew closer. I clutched William's letter tightly against my chest. The workshop door handle slowly began to turn. The workshop door creaked open. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floor. No one inside the room moved. No one breathed. Greg had motioned for us to stand behind the large shelving unit where William used to store lumber. From the doorway, it looked like nothing more than a stack of old plywood and paint cans. Michael stepped inside first. He switched on only a small flashlight. "I know I left it here," he muttered. Calvin followed close behind. Unlike Michael, he wasn't nervous. He was irritated. "You've made enough mistakes already." "I'm trying." "Trying isn't good enough." I glanced toward Robert. He had already started recording the conversation on his phone. Every word now mattered. Michael searched behind the workbench. "It's not here." "It has to be. I checked yesterday." Calvin's voice hardened. "Then check again." For the next several minutes, they searched every cabinet, every shelf, every toolbox. Finally, Michael leaned against the workbench in frustration. "I don't understand." Calvin looked directly at him. "You were supposed to destroy those papers." My heart pounded. Destroy them. Michael lowered his head. "I couldn't." "Why? They belonged to Dad." Calvin laughed coldly. "Your father has been dead for 3 years. Michael didn't answer. Calvin stepped closer. "The dead don't close real estate deals." For the first time since all this began, I saw my son flinch. Not physically, emotionally. The words had hurt him. Good. Perhaps somewhere beneath all the lies the son William and I had raised still existed. Michael sat down heavily on an old stool. I never wanted this. Calvin folded his arms. You wanted your business. I wanted to save it. And this saves it. Michael shook his head. No. It postpones bankruptcy. Calvin smiled. Same difference. No. Michael's voice cracked. It is. I had never heard him sound so defeated. I've already lost half my equipment. I know. I mortgaged my house. I know. Amanda barely sleeps. I know. Michael buried his face in his hands. I don't know how I got here. For a brief moment, I forgot my anger. I only saw my little boy, the child who used to run barefoot through the fields chasing butterflies, the teenager who cried after failing his first driver's test because he thought he had disappointed me, the young father who held Emily in his arms and whispered that he would always protect her. Where had that man gone? Calvin wasn't interested in emotions. He placed a thick folder onto William's workbench. You have two choices. Michael looked up. What? Either finish this or lose everything. Michael stared silently. Calvin opened the folder. Bank notices, collection demands, default letters. Every page carried bright red stamps. Final notice, past due, default. I've seen those. You haven't seen all of them. Calvin slid another document forward. Michael's expression changed instantly. What is this? The personal guarantee. You thought wrong. Michael began reading faster. His hands started trembling. They can take... He stopped speaking. They can take my house. Calvin nodded. Yes. My savings. Yes. Amanda's inheritance. Yes. My retirement account. Yes. Michael looked physically ill. Calvin leaned forward. Unless the Johnson property closes. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then Michael whispered something I never expected to hear. I should tell Mom the truth. Calvin's smile disappeared. No. I can't keep lying. You've already lied. I know. So finish what you started. Michael stood. No. Calvin remained perfectly calm. You don't have a choice. I do. If you confess now. He tapped the folder. The banks destroy you. I deserve it. The words surprised everyone, even Calvin. Michael continued quietly. I deserve bankruptcy. I deserve losing my company. I deserve people's anger. He swallowed hard. But Mom doesn't deserve this. Tears filled my eyes. Too late, far too late, but genuine nonetheless. Calvin's voice turned icy. Think about Emily. Michael froze. What? You enjoy seeing your daughter lose her home? No. You want her changing schools? No. You want her watching movers empty your house? Michael looked away. Calvin had found the one weakness that still controlled him. Fear for his daughter. You've already gone this far, Calvin continued. One more signature. One more closing. And everyone walks away happy. Michael whispered, Mom won't. Calvin shrugged. She'll survive. No? Michael shook his head. You don't know her. I know enough. No. A faint smile crossed Michael's face. You've mistaken kindness for weakness. I felt tears running down my cheeks. William used to say those exact words. Kindness was never weakness. Suddenly, Greg leaned toward Robert and whispered, "We have enough." Robert nodded. "So do I." He quietly stepped away from the shelves. Before I realized what he intended to do, he switched on the workshop lights. The room flooded with brightness. Michael spun around. His face turned completely white. "Mom!" Amanda gasped. Daniel stepped forward from another corner of the workshop. Robert stood beside him. Greg remained near the door. Only Calvin recovered quickly. "What exactly is the meaning of this?" Robert answered calmly. "The meaning," he held up his phone, "is that every word you just spoke has been recorded." For the first time, Calvin looked uncertain. Michael couldn't even look at me. "I'm sorry." Those were the first words he had spoken directly to me since changing the locks. "I'm so sorry." I didn't answer immediately, not because I hadn't heard him, because I needed to know whether he was apologizing to avoid consequences, or because he finally understood what he had done. Calvin interrupted. "This recording proves nothing." Robert smiled. "It proves quite a lot." "No." "It proves coercion. It proves knowledge. It proves intent." Daniel added quietly. "It also proves Blue Ridge Horizon was deliberately misled." Calvin looked toward him. "You too." Daniel met his gaze. "You lied to my company." Calvin laughed, a slow, confident laugh. "You think this ends me?" Robert answered. "I think it begins." Calvin reached for the folder on the workbench. Greg moved instantly. "You'll leave that where it is." Calvin stopped. The former investigator's voice carried quiet authority. For the first time that evening, Calvin realized he no longer controlled the room. Michael finally looked directly at me. His eyes were red. "I never wanted to hurt you." I walked toward him slowly, stopping only a few feet away. "You still did." "I know." "You packed my life into boxes." "I know." "You locked me out." "I know." "You let strangers measure your father's land." He closed his eyes. "I know." I waited, then asked the question that had haunted me since returning from Maine. "Tell me one thing." He nodded weakly. "When you changed those locks?" "Did you honestly believe I would never find out?" He stared at the floor for several seconds before answering. "No." "What did you believe?" His voice broke. "I believed that by the time you came home, it would already be too late." Those words hurt more than everything else combined. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. That had been the plan from the beginning, to leave me with no choice. No home, no voice, no time. But William had prepared for something Michael never imagined. Facts, documents, truth. And standing in that workshop, surrounded by every lie that had brought us there, I realized the battle for my family's future was almost over. Only one final reckoning remained. No one spoke for several long seconds. The workshop felt impossibly quiet. The only sound came from the old wall clock William had repaired dozens of times over the years. Tick, tick, tick. Michael stood only a few feet away from me, unable to meet my eyes. Amanda stared at the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Calvin, however, remained strangely calm. Too calm. He slowly straightened his suit jacket. "This has become unnecessarily dramatic," he said. Robert almost smiled. "I don't think the district attorney will describe it that way." Calvin shrugged. You've recorded a private conversation. I've recorded admissions. They're meaningless. They're not. Calvin folded his hands behind his back. You still can't prove I forged anything. Robert looked toward Daniel. Daniel quietly placed another folder on William's workbench. I think we can. Calvin's confident expression faded ever so slightly. Daniel opened the folder. After leaving your office yesterday, he said, our compliance department searched every internal server. He removed several printed emails. We also recovered deleted files. Calvin's eyes narrowed. Deleted? Daniel nodded. Our IT department keeps automatic backups. He slid one page toward Robert, an email from Calvin Reed to Michael Johnson. Subject updated POA package. Robert slowly read the first paragraph aloud. Replace pages 4 through 7 before presenting them. Jennifer will never compare them to the original. The room fell silent. Calvin didn't speak. Daniel continued reading. Her signature page remains valid. Do not disturb the staple alignment. I felt a chill run through my body. Robert looked directly at Calvin. Still think we can't prove anything. Michael stared at the printed email as though he had never seen it before. What? He looked at Calvin. You told me that deleting emails erased everything, Calvin answered coldly. I assumed it had. Michael laughed bitterly. Assumed. His voice cracked. I trusted you. Calvin didn't even blink. You trusted money. That sentence struck Michael harder than any insult. He stepped backward until he hit William's workbench. I trusted someone who promised I could fix everything. No. Calvin's tone remained emotionless. You trusted yourself. For the first time, Michael raised his voice. No, the word echoed through the workshop. You knew I was desperate. You knew the banks were closing in. You knew Emily. You knew my family. And you used all of it. Calvin's expression never changed. You signed every document voluntarily. I signed because you said there was no other choice. There wasn't. There always is. Michael slammed his fist against the workbench. My father said that. I closed my eyes. Yes, William had said it often. There is always another honest choice. Greg stepped forward. Mr. Reed. Calvin looked at him. I'm advising you not to say anything else. Calvin smiled. I don't take legal advice from retired investigators. Greg shrugged. Suit yourself. Robert gathered every document into neat stacks. Jennifer. Yes, these papers belong to you. I accepted them carefully. Holding them felt strangely symbolic. For days, everyone else had acted as though they controlled my life. Now the truth rested in my own hands. Amanda suddenly began crying. Not quietly, not gracefully. She collapsed into a chair. I didn't want this. Michael looked at her in disbelief. What? I never wanted it to go this far. You were the one who kept saying we had to finish before Mom came home. I was scared. So was I. We were drowning. Michael stared at her. You told me this would save us. I believed Calvin. So did I. Amanda covered her face. I kept telling myself we'd apologize afterward. My heart broke all over again. Apologize afterward. As though betrayal could simply be scheduled between closing documents and moving trucks. Daniel quietly interrupted. I have one question. Everyone looked toward him. He addressed Michael. If the sale had closed? Michael nodded weakly. Yes. Would you have told your mother the truth? Michael answered without hesitation. Yes. When? He swallowed. After everything was irreversible. I appreciated his honesty. Painful honesty, but honesty nonetheless. Robert finally closed the evidence folder. I believe we're finished here. Greg nodded. I've documented everything. Daniel added, so have we. Calvin looked around the room. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. You think you've won? No one answered. He continued. The property sale is over. Yes. My consulting work is finished. Yes. But your family, he looked directly at me, will never recover. I met his eyes calmly. You don't know my family. He laughed. I know betrayal. No. I slowly shook my head. You know transactions. He frowned. There's a difference. You convinced people that everything has a price. I held William's letter against my chest. My husband spent 43 years proving that some things don't. For the first time that evening, Calvin had nothing to say. Just then, flashing blue lights appeared through the workshop windows. Several vehicles pulled into the driveway. Daniel looked at me. I called them. I nodded. I thought you might. 2 sheriff's deputies entered the workshop. One of them approached Robert first. We received a report concerning fraudulent real estate documents. Robert handed over the evidence folder. Everything is organized chronologically. The deputy accepted it, then turned toward Calvin. Sir, we'd like to ask you some questions. Calvin glanced toward the open door. For a split second, I wondered whether he might run. Instead, he quietly nodded. I'll cooperate. As one deputy escorted him outside, he looked back only once. At Michael. Not at me. Not at Robert. At Michael. His expression carried no sympathy, only disappointment. To Calvin. My son had simply become a failed business investment. The deputies remained for nearly another hour, collecting copies of emails, recordings, contracts, and witness statements. When they finally left, the workshop grew quiet once more. Only 4 of us remained. Me, Michael, Amanda, Susan, Daniel, and Robert had stepped outside to speak privately. Michael looked around the workshop. His father's tools, his father's maps, his father's unfinished rocking chair still resting against the wall. He slowly walked toward it. I was supposed to finish this for him. I remembered. William had started building that chair only weeks before his cancer diagnosis. He never had the strength to complete it. Michael had promised he would. Instead, the chair had gathered dust for 3 years. I forgot who I wanted to become, he whispered. I walked over slowly, standing beside him. The unfinished chair sat between us. You didn't forget. He looked at me. You chose something else. Tears rolled down his face. I know. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Very carefully, he removed a single key, the new house key. He placed it gently into my hand. It was never mine. I looked down at the small piece of brass. Such an ordinary object. Yet it had represented everything that had been stolen from me. Not just access, respect, trust, home. I closed my fingers around it, then quietly said, tomorrow. Michael looked up. We're going home. The next morning, I stood at the end of my driveway just after sunrise. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, I held the new house key in my hand. The morning air smelled of fresh-cut grass and damp earth. Birds sang from the old oak trees William had planted decades earlier. Everything looked exactly as it always had, and yet, nothing was the same. Michael parked his pickup truck beside the barn and walked toward me alone. No Amanda, no contractors, no moving trucks, just my son. His shoulders lumped with exhaustion. He looked 10 years older than he had only a week before. Without saying a word, he handed me another key. The back door, then another. The workshop, then another. The barn. Finally, he reached into his pocket one last time. The gate! I looked at the 4 keys resting in my palm. You changed every lock. He nodded. I know. Do you know how that felt? His voice barely rose above a whisper. I didn't understand then. And now, I do. I slipped the keys into my coat pocket. I hope you never forget. I won't. We walked toward the farmhouse together. Every step brought back memories. Michael taking his first steps across this very porch. William teaching him how to hammer a nail. Emily catching fireflies in the yard every summer. So many beautiful moments. So many reasons worth fighting for. Michael stopped before opening the front door. I need to tell you something. I'm listening? I fired every contractor yesterday. I looked at him. They're gone. The equipment? Returned. The developer's survey markers. I removed them. He hesitated. I also took down the for sale sign. A small part of my heart softened. Not because the sign was gone, because he had finally started undoing the damage himself. The front door opened slowly. For the first time since returning from Maine, I stepped inside my home. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Dust floated quietly through the beams of light. The furniture still sat covered with protective sheets. Half-packed boxes remained stacked against the walls. One of my family photographs lay face down on the coffee table. I picked it up. It showed William standing beside the apple orchard smiling at the camera while pretending to hold an enormous pumpkin over his head. I smiled through my tears. You always hated posing for pictures. Michael laughed weakly. He said pumpkins were easier to work with than photographers. He certainly did. For just a second, it felt like William was still with us. Together, Michael and I began uncovering the furniture. Neither of us spoke very much. There was no need. Some conversations happened through actions. He carefully returned my mother's china cabinet to its original place. He rehung the grandfather clock. He carried William's rocking chair back onto the porch exactly where it had belonged. Every object he moved seemed to lift another small piece of guilt from his shoulders. Around noon, Amanda arrived. She stood quietly in the doorway. I didn't know if you'd let me come. I looked at her for several moments, then stepped aside. This is still your family's home. She immediately burst into tears. I'm sorry. I know. No. She shook her head. You don't. She reached into her purse and removed a small flash drive. I need you to have this. What is it? Everything. Robert had joined us earlier that morning and accepted the drive. He plugged it into his laptop. Folders appeared on the screen. Emails, scanned documents, draft contracts, text messages. Then another folder labeled Calvin. Robert opened it. Inside were dozens of messages. Most involved Michael. Some involved Amanda. But one folder immediately caught his attention. Other clients. Robert frowned. What is this? Amanda wiped her eyes. I copied everything after I realized what we'd done. Daniel, who had arrived shortly afterward, leaned over Robert's shoulder. Oh my. What? I asked. Daniel slowly turned the screen toward us. There were at least 12 separate property files. Each belonged to elderly landowners. Each contained nearly identical strategies. Family pressure, power of attorney, quick closings, minimal owner contact. Robert quietly closed the laptop. This isn't just your case. No. Amanda lowered her head. It never was. Later that afternoon, 2 detectives arrived. They spent nearly 3 hours reviewing the files Amanda had provided. One detective finally looked at me. Mrs. Johnson? Yes. Your daughter-in-law may have just helped us solve several ongoing investigations. Amanda looked shocked. I didn't know. We believe you. The detective nodded. But Mr. Reed appears to have repeated the same pattern many times. Robert looked toward me. William's instincts were right. They were. He saw the warning signs before anyone else. I glanced toward the workshop. He always paid attention to people, not just paperwork, people. As evening approached, the house slowly began feeling like home again. Emily came running through the front door after school. Grandma! She threw her arms around me so tightly I nearly lost my balance. I missed you. I missed you too. She looked around the living room. You're staying? I smiled. Where else would I go? She laughed. This is your house. Those 6 simple words meant more than she could possibly understand. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael knocked gently on my bedroom door. Can we talk? Of course. He sat in the old chair beside the window, the same chair where William had once read bedtime stories to him. For several minutes, he simply stared out into the darkness. Finally, he spoke. I met with the bank today. How did it go? They're taking the company. I nodded quietly. My trucks. My equipment. My office. It's all gone. I'm sorry. He shook his head. No. I earned this. You earned consequences. He looked at me. I don't deserve another chance. I thought about William's letter. Hold him accountable. But if God gives him a chance to become the man we raised, don't let your anger steal that chance from him. I took a deep breath. You don't deserve another chance because you're my son. Michael looked confused. You deserve another chance because you're finally telling the truth. Tears filled his eyes again. I don't know how to rebuild. You start the same way your father did. How? One honest day at a time. He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. He handed me a small envelope. What is this? I found it inside Dad's toolbox after everyone left. I opened it carefully. Inside was an old photograph. William, my father, and me, standing together beside the Western Survey marker. Across the back, William had written only one sentence. The greatest inheritance is not land. It's the character to protect it. I held the photograph against my heart. William had left us one final lesson. The land had never been real treasure. It had simply revealed who each of us truly was. Tomorrow, the legal battle would officially end. But tonight, for the first time in a very long while, our family had finally begun telling each other the truth. 3 months later, autumn settled gently over our little corner of North Carolina. The maple trees surrounding the farmhouse had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Every morning, fallen leaves covered the front yard, and every morning, I swept them away with the same old broom William had repaired more times than I could count. Some routines are worth keeping. Others deserve to be left behind forever. The legal proceedings had finally come to an end. Calvin Reed eventually accepted a plea agreement after investigators uncovered evidence linking him to multiple fraudulent real estate schemes involving elderly landowners across several counties. Amanda's copied files had become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. Several families recovered properties they had believed were lost forever. When I heard that news, I cried. Not because justice had been served, because so many people had nearly suffered the same heartbreak. Blue Ridge Horizon publicly withdrew from every transaction Calvin had handled. Daniel Carter personally visited our farmhouse one final time. He stood beside the old fence overlooking the western pasture. "I owe you another apology," he said. "You've already apologized." "Not enough," I smiled. "You listened when the truth appeared." He nodded. "I've changed our company's verification policies." How no purchase involving elderly property owners can proceed without meeting the owner in person. William would have approved of that. Sometimes the best victories aren't measured by what you win. They're measured by what changes afterward. Michael's construction company disappeared. The bank auctioned most of his heavy equipment. Watching the bulldozers and trucks leave the yard was painful. Those machines had once represented his biggest dreams. Now they represented the cost of abandoning his principles. One Saturday morning, he knocked on my door wearing worn jeans and an old work shirt. "I found a job." I smiled. "Doing what?" "Framing houses." "For another contractor?" "Yes." "How does it feel?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Honest." There was no shame in beginning again. William had started with nothing but a borrowed hammer and a pickup truck that barely ran. Character builds more than companies ever can. Amanda also changed. She volunteered with a nonprofit organization that helped senior citizens understand legal documents before signing them. One afternoon, she told me quietly, "I keep thinking about how easily we almost destroyed your life." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "So do I." "I'll regret it forever." "Then make sure someone else never has to." She nodded through tears. "I will." And she did. Emily visited every Sunday after church. She had claimed William's old workshop as her favorite place on the property. One afternoon, I found her sanding the unfinished rocking chair. "What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled. "Finishing what Grandpa started." Together, we spent nearly 6 weeks completing that chair. Michael joined us on weekends. Amanda painted the finish. Susan sewed the cushion. When it was finally complete, we placed it exactly where William had always intended, on the front porch facing the western hills. Every evening, I sat there watching the sunset. Sometimes alone, sometimes with family, always grateful. One crisp October afternoon, Robert Hayes arrived carrying a small folder. "I have something for you." "What is it?" He handed me an official county document. I unfolded it carefully. Across the top were the words, "Verified ownership confirmation." Everything remained exactly as it should. Owner, Jennifer Marie Johnson. No liens. No unauthorized transfers. No disputed claims. Just the truth. Robert smiled. "I thought you'd want the final copy." "I do." He hesitated before leaving. "Jennifer." "Yes." "You know what? I've practiced law for 38 years, and I've won bigger cases, but I've never seen one teach so many people the same lesson." I smiled. "I hope they remember it." "So do I." That evening, I carried William's final letter onto the porch. The completed rocking chair creaked softly beneath me. The same breeze drifted across the hills that my parents had once walked. The same breeze William had loved. I unfolded his letter one last time. Then I noticed something I had somehow overlooked. At the very bottom, beneath his signature, he had added a single sentence. "Take care of the people before you take care of the property." I laughed quietly. Even after everything, William still managed to have the final word. People often ask whether I forgave Michael. The answer is both simple and complicated. I forgave him. Not because he deserved forgiveness. Not because what he did wasn't terrible. I forgave him because carrying bitterness would have given Calvin Reed one final victory over our family. Forgiveness, however, did not erase consequences. Michael rebuilt his life one paycheck at a time. Trust returned much more slowly. Years later, he told me something I'll never forget. The hardest part wasn't losing my business. It wasn't. No. What was it? The day I realized I'd become someone Dad wouldn't recognize. That was the true cost of his choices. Not bankruptcy, not lost equipment, not public embarrassment. The loss of himself. Fortunately, he found his way back. As for me, I still live in the farmhouse. Every spring I plant tomatoes beside the garden where William used to whistle while pulling weeds. Every summer, Emily helps me pick apples from the old orchard. Every autumn, the western hills glow exactly as they did when I was a little girl, running barefoot beside my father. And every winter, our family gathers around the same fireplace that nearly disappeared beneath renovation plans. The house survived. The land survived. Most importantly, our family survived. Not because we ignored the truth, but because we finally faced it. If this story teaches anything, I hope it's this: never mistake kindness for weakness. The quietest people often carry the strongest convictions. Paperwork matters. Signatures matter. Laws matter. But none of them matter as much as character. Money can build houses. Character builds homes. And homes, real homes, are never protected by locks alone. They are protected by honesty, courage, and the people willing to stand for what is right, even when the people they must stand against are the ones they love most. Thank you for spending this time with me. If Jennifer's journey touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who believes that integrity is worth protecting. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never forget that the greatest inheritance you can leave your family